You're listening to Mentoring Developers. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the materials, some of the topics that you've written about in the last few years. One of them is pair programming. You have some experience with that and you wrote about it. Do you want to talk to our audience about pair programming, what it is, what's good about it, and what's bad?
Yeah, absolutely. Pair programming sounds like something that would never work. What it is it's two people sitting in front of the same computer with two keyboards and two mice, and they're both working on the same piece of code. If you are used to programming by yourself, this sounds like crazy talk, right? This sounds ridiculous. How would that even work? In reality, how it turns out usually is that it's like having a conversation and then some code gets written sort of incidentally, but you always have someone to talk to about all of the decisions you're making about code. So when we write code, when we implement a feature, we make thousands of tiny little decisions about things like, where should this code go? How should I implement this? What algorithm should I use? Which method in the standard library does what I want? Or do I need to write a new one? Is there already something like this in the code base that I should look at? All of these tiny decisions that we make as we're writing the code, when you're pair programming, each of those decisions gets looked at by two people at once. And so it's almost like synchronous code review. You're writing this code together, and so there's always more than one pair of eyes on everything. Now, I've worked at places that didn't do pair programming and instead did sort of a pull request peer review model where you would write code and then you would make a pull request or sort of indicate that you are ready for your code to be merged, and then other developers would look at your code and give you feedback on it. Now, worst case, this can be a very daunting, intimidating, and negative experience because people are coming in without all of the context in which the code was written. Sometimes they don't know the business problem that well, or they don't know some of the conventions or something along those lines, right? And so people will come in without all this context and they'll make comments that will, feel very attacking, feel very personal. And at best, it takes longer than if you're pairing because the person has to acquire the context in order to be able to review the code effectively. And so usually what happens is neither of those cases. Usually what happens is that a couple people look at it very perfunctorily and just okay it or don't okay it. And as a result, a lot of code is never really reviewed by more than one person. And you might wonder, who cares, right? If your code is if you're the only one that knows everything about your code, you've got job security, right? This is definitely a thing that people have told me in the past, is they feel like, well, I'm the only one that knows about this very important piece of code, so they can't fire me. And while there is a certain truth to that, and there certainly was in the past, I think what people are discovering now is that having a piece of code that only one of your developers knows anything about is a huge risk for the business. Because if that person leaves, you have to spend a lot of time and a lot of effort to figure out what their code was doing. Whereas if every piece of code in your code base was looked at by more than one person, then in theory, that probably wouldn't happen unless a bunch of people left at once, right? In which case you've got bigger problems. And I think when I was working at Pivotal Labs, we tended to call this the bus number, which is how many members of your development team have to be hit by a bus before your company is out of business, right? And you want that number to basically be infinite, right? Like all of your developers could get hit by a bus. But because the code has been looked at by so many people, there will always be someone that knows what's going on. So I look at pair programming both as a way to reduce the business risk of unreviewed code and as a way to disseminate knowledge across teams and across people in a way that is extremely effective, even more so than code reviews and that kind of thing. Having someone sit and pair with you is an amazing way to learn a new skill. I remember I came to Pivotal Labs and I had not really done any front-end programming. This was 2010 or so. And I had done a little bit, I'd done table layouts, right, in HTML. That was where I was in terms of front-end development.
That's state of the art in 2010, right?
Well, yeah, no, there's already CSS at that point, right? And my JavaScript skills was basically like change the code and then reload the page to see if it worked, right? So I was very, very, very rudimentary front end development skills. And I had tried to look at CSS a couple times. I just kind of didn't get it. I didn't understand how you're supposed to make stuff line up or make stuff vertically columns and stuff like that. So I came to Pivotal, and the first week I was there, I paired on some front-end CSS and HTML stuff with someone who really knew what they were doing. And by the end of 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks I was there, I went and completely redesigned my entire personal homepage, took out all the tables, redid all of it in CSS. And I had tried to learn CSS for years. I kept knowing, I knew that I wanted to learn it. It was one of those things, and I just couldn't quite get it on my own. Or didn't have time to. But 2 weeks of pairing, and I felt like I was basically an expert. Of course, there's always a lot more to learn. But it was an amazing way to learn stuff very quickly. And that was what I liked about it most at Pivotal, was that it meant that I essentially learned all of the superpowers of all of the people around me, right? I absorbed all of the things they could do, and they absorbed all the things I could do. And it leads to an extremely highly functioning team. And this is I don't think that you can have a team that is truly full stack unless you're doing a lot of pair programming, because people come in with different sets of experience. And a lot of times they've chosen, they're focused on front-end development or focused on back-end development or focused on being a DBA or a system administrator or what have you. And when you bring everybody together, in order to have them be full stack, you really need them all to absorb each other's powers. And pairing is one of the most effective ways to make sure that happens. Now, I would add to that, though, that pair programming is a skill. It's not something you can just kind of decide to do and you're automatically good at it. There's definitely a lot of ways to do it that will make it ineffective or certainly less effective at doing that. And it's interesting when I talk to people who are like, oh my God, I had to do pairing at this job and it was terrible. When I talk to them about what they actually did while they were pairing, I realized that pairing is one of those things that you can read books about it all you want, but it's actually quite difficult to imagine what it's like to do it well without actually doing it, without actually having a pair that knows what they're doing and is skilled at pairing specifically, not necessarily at the programming you're doing, but at pairing, and who can, make sure that you both get as much out of it as you can.
Thank you so much for listening.
For show notes and transcripts, visit us at mentoringdevelopers.com.